You ever stop and think about how the United States even became, well, the United States? It really wasn't a sure thing. The country we know today wasn't born overnight. It was a huge leap of faith, from a shaky league of friendship to a federation designed to last. So let's get into how that monumental shift actually happened. I mean, this was the question, right? This was the massive problem the founders were staring down. They had just won a revolution, which is hard enough, but now they had an even bigger problem. You've got 13 states that basically see themselves as independent countries, and they're all squabbling over land, money, you name it. How in the world do you get them to form one single effective nation?
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to look at that first experiment in government, that League of Friendship. Then we'll see how they architected a whole new nation from scratch. We'll dive into the great compromise that saved the whole project, break down how they split up the power, and finally look at the kind of union they built to last.
So first up, let's talk about that initial experiment. Because before we had the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation. This was America's first shot at creating a national government. And that phrase right there, League of Friendship, is everything. You really have to understand this. Under the Articles, the states were basically like 13 separate countries in a loose club. Think of it like the European Union or the UN today. They were all sovereign, and the central government, well, it had almost no real power over them at all. And you can really see the massive shift in thinking right here. On one side, you've got this temporary, loosey-goosey alliance where the states are king. They could basically ignore the central government if they wanted to. On the other side, you've got a permanent union where the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, starting with the powerful words, "we the people." That's a huge, huge difference in philosophy.
And man, was this first system a mess. Just imagine trying to run a country when you can't even tax people to pay your own soldiers. That's not a hypothetical. It actually happened. You had events like Shays' Rebellion, where angry farmers were rising up because the government was so weak. It was a recipe for total chaos. And it became super clear, super fast, that this whole League of Friendship thing was a total bust.
So, something had to give. The leaders saw the writing on the wall, and they all got together in Philadelphia in 1787. Now, get this. They originally just showed up to tweak the Articles. But pretty quickly, they were like, you know what? This thing is broken beyond repair. Let's just start from scratch. And I love this quote because it just nails their new mission. They realized they needed social cement. They weren't just slapping some duct tape on a broken system anymore. No, they were trying to pour a foundation that could hold this crazy, diverse, growing country together. Forever. And that, right there, is the pivotal moment. The entire mission changed. It went from, let's patch up this temporary league, to, let's engineer a permanent, unified nation. A total game changer. Okay, but that led to a massive fight almost immediately. You've got the big states, like Virginia, saying, hey, we have way more people, so we should get way more votes. And then you've got the small states, like Delaware, absolutely terrified, thinking we're going to get totally steamrolled. So what do you do?
Well, the solution was an idea called a bicameral legislature. It sounds fancy, but the concept is actually pretty simple. You just create a government with two separate chambers, or two houses.
And here's the genius of it. In one house, the House of Representatives, the number of seats is based on population. Boom, the big states are happy. But in the other house, the Senate, every single state gets exactly 2 senators. Doesn't matter if you're huge or tiny. And just like that, the small states are protected. It was the perfect compromise.
What came out of this brilliant compromise is something we call dual sovereignty. It's this incredible balancing act where power gets shared between the national government and the states. And that constant tug of war, that dynamic, it is still at the very heart of American politics today.
All right, so they've got the structure. Now for the really big question. Who gets to do what? Let's break down how they actually divvied up all the power. First, let's talk about delegated powers. Think of these as the official job description for the new federal government. They're the powers that are written down, plain as day, in the Constitution, giving the national government some real teeth for the first time. And these are the big ones, the stuff you absolutely need to be a real, functioning country. We're talking about controlling the military, dealing with other nations, making sure trade between the states is fair, and creating a single national currency. All the basic stuff that was a total disaster under the old articles. But, and this is a huge but, they didn't just hand over all the keys to the federal government. They came up with this brilliant idea of reserved powers. The concept is super simple. If the Constitution doesn't specifically give a power to the feds, then it automatically belongs to the states. And a lot of these reserved powers are things you and I deal with every single day, right? Local police departments, the schools our kids go to, family law, professional licenses, all that stuff. This was a really smart way to make sure the states still had a ton of control over their own business. So let's bring it all home and talk about the final product. The whole point, remember, was to build something that would actually last. And what they left behind is, well, it's pretty fascinating. And here is the absolute biggest takeaway from all of this. This was not another league of friendship. The Constitution created a permanent federation. It was a binding contract. You couldn't just pack up your bags and leave if you got mad about a new law. Nope. Once you were in for good. Which leads us to this really cool, kind of paradoxical idea. You'd think the reason the Constitution has lasted so long is because it's rigid and set in stone, right? But it's the complete opposite. Its real strength comes from its ability to change. It was built with an update feature, the amendment process, so that it could stay stable by evolving with the times. So that's the question we're left with, isn't it? The founders gave us this incredible piece of political engineering, a system designed for change to ensure its own survival. But after more than 200 years of wars, new technology, and massive cultural shifts, we have to ask, is that original architecture still working the way they intended?